Sunday Baroque Conversations is made possible by the Friends of Sunday Baroque and is produced at WSHU Public Radio in Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm Suzanne. Thank you for listening. Don't miss an episode of Sunday Baroque Conversations. Subscribe on Apple, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a review. If you want to find out where you can listen to our weekly show, visit our website, sundaybaroque.org, for a station list and our 24/7 stream. Again, that's sundaybaroque.org.
Siete modos de guisado, se guisa la berenjena, la primera que la guisa es la baba de Helena, ya le hace bocadicos y la
Trio Sefardi is a Northern Virginia-based ensemble that performs traditional songs of the Sephardim, the descendants of Jews exiled from Spain in 1492. Trio Sefardi's multi-talented members are specialists in jazz and folk music, early music, and much more. Founding member Howard Bass plays lute, guitar, and percussion. Tina Chancey plays bowed string instruments and percussion and is a backup vocalist. And singer Susan Gaeta also plays guitar and percussion. Howard Bass and Tina Chancey join me on Zoom to talk about their work. Welcome.
Thank you.
So would you please start by explaining more about the Sephardim? Kind of start right from the beginning.
Take it, Howard.
The Sephardim are the descendants of the Jews of Spain, exiled in 1492 and spread throughout the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Middle East, the southern parts of Europe, and in particular in the Ottoman Empire in the eastern side of the Mediterranean, Turkey, the Balkans, and there they've lived and flourished for many centuries up until World War II in most cases, especially in the Balkans, where most of the communities were destroyed by the Nazis in World War II. Mm-hmm. The traditions have been kept alive in a variety of ways, and through singers and through the work of folklorists and ethnomusicologists who collected these songs in the 20th century for the most part. Mm. And also because nowadays there are people actually writing new songs. Mm. So the repertoire is, considering such a small segment of the overall world population, the repertoire is surprisingly large and varied because it comes from very diverse places, from the Eastern Mediterranean, from Turkey, which is one style, from the Balkans, which is another, from North Africa, which is yet another. So we, as a trio, have benefited largely from our interactions and our work over many years with Flory Jagoda, originally from Bosnia, who kept alive the traditions that were passed down through her family and through her community, and to which she added immeasurably with songs that she composed and arrangements she made of a good many old songs that she remembered learning from her grandmother.
Right. Well, that's a great jumping off point, because my next question is, what are the particular characteristics of Sephardic music? Tina, you want to take this one?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, because the language stayed consistent throughout the Ladino world, as it were, but the music really changed according to where they were. That in the Balkan states, Ladino music sounds like it's in lots of sevens and nines and fives and things like that. In the Middle East, it sounds more modal and more in the texture where you'd have a bunch of people doing the melody, with an accompaniment of drum, and it really, just like the language kind of leached into Ladino, the musical practices did too. So when people talk about Sephardic music from the earliest sources, we don't actually have a lot of early sources. What we have is a bunch of people who did a lot of interviewing and tune collecting, just like Lomax did in North America. So people went and collected tunes. Howard, when about the 1920s, right?
Yeah, from about the 1900 on through the first part of the 20th century was a lot of collections of Sephardic songs were made and written down and published, and those have become primary sources for a lot of the music that people are doing now. In addition to some Sephardic singers who continued the traditions, such as Flory Jagoda, with whom we all worked very closely for many years.
Right. But Flory was also a composer. And just like any living tradition, people just didn't do the tunes from the past, but they made up their own. So that's, of course, the exciting part. And working with Flory meant that we played a lot of the tunes that she wrote as well.
So why is this music important to each of you, and why is it important to share with audiences?
I think maybe I speak for both Howard and Susan when I'd say that we feel honored to I wouldn't say that we are the only repositories of the tradition, but to have worked so closely with somebody for whom it was a living tradition. And, her ancestors, were very important to her, and a sense of continuity was something that was very important to her. And even though my relatives are Ashkenaz, to be able to help someone continue their tradition when they're not around anymore is makes me feel good. Makes me feel like the music I have is not just something that entertains people, but it shares something from the past. And I love that. So,
Howard, you want to add to
I
that?
wouldn't say that we're borrowing the tradition as much as we're helping to continue it.
Yeah, or amplifying it maybe. Yeah.
I agree with Tina, and I think it's important to point out that large number of the Sephardic communities existed in Europe up until the middle of the 20th century were destroyed in World War II. So to me, and as Tina said, to all of us, we've taken very seriously what Flory would say. It is important to continue, and we that is part of our mission. It's not the only part of our mission, but to keep the language in front of people, a language that has been placed on the endangered language list. It is I'd like to say it's a distinct language, except that in some ways it's many languages, because it's not, it's like English. I mean, there are all sorts of different dialects, and depending where people come from. And so there are a lot of differences among the various versions of Ladino, but it is important to keep the traditions alive, to keep the songs alive, to keep the stories of the Sephardic people alive, because they have an illustrious history, an important history. In the United States, for example, the earliest synagogues were founded by Sephardic Jews. They were the first ones to come to America. So there is an old tradition of Sephardic culture in this country. And more the number of people who speak Ladino in the home is diminishing. So through the songs and through the stories that the songs tell, their history and their tradition is kept alive and is not lost.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about Flory that she came to the States. She married an American during the Second World War and came to the States. But all of her relatives except her parents died. And her mother in particular was so unhappy that I don't think Flory, she didn't do any Ladino music, right? For maybe 30 years until her mother died. She sang with the local group called the Swappers, and they sang folk music, various traditions, but she didn't start writing music until I guess she was about 60 and her mother had died. And so from the time she was 60 to about the time she was 94, 95, she had a great career.
Wow.
A lot later than most people have a career.
Sure. Now I noticed it's sort of interesting too, the instrumentation that you typically are drawing from, and it's actually, you mentioned folk music, but I actually was thinking exactly that same thing. Like it's a very sort of folk music kind of texture, lute, guitar, voice, A little bit of percussion, maybe a little bit of string instrument, but it's a very sort of spare kind of instrumentation. Is that intentional? Is where does that come from? Is there a reason that would be somehow identified as Sephardic?
Not necessarily. We use the instruments that we enjoy playing, and we find ways to fit the instruments to the music. Many people would say that really the tradition of these songs, the kind of songs we do, which are mainly secular, were sung unaccompanied.
Oh.
And that's probably largely true, mainly, I think, because people didn't have the means to get instruments. But when they did have instruments, they used them, and that's indisputable. But it depends, again, as Tina was saying earlier, about the styles in which this music is played. If you heard Turkish Sephardic Jews playing, you'd hear Turkish instruments. You'd hear very distinctive instruments like the oud and the kanun and what's the hammered dulcimer called? the Turkish hammered dulcimer. I can't think of it right now.
Yes, gone out of my brain.
Yeah. So and from North Africa, you'd hear an oud, and you might hear a bowed string instruments. Flory grew up with the accordion, and also with guitars. We have pictures of her family with guitars. So it for us, because we come out of our various backgrounds and traditions, we're playing the instruments that we enjoy playing, and it seems to work.
Yeah. So what else are you passionate about right now? Is there any project or projects in the pipeline that you want to tell us a little bit about?
I'll tell you about one program that's already out there that we worked on, which Tina is largely responsible for putting together. It's a program called La Nona Canta, The Remarkable Life of Flory Jagoda. It combines a filmed interview with Flory that was done later in her career, but while she was still very, very capable of telling her story. And we weave in live songs from her repertoire, images of various kinds. It's a multimedia show. We've done it a number of times, and it's a wonderful way of remembering Flory, who died last year at the age of 97. Actually, it's been more than a year, I think.
It's longer, yeah.
3 years.
And by the end, she didn't know us, but she was just happy to see everybody.
Yes, she was, and hear the songs.
Yeah.
So that's one project that's completed. We don't have anything. We have 4 CDs out now. The last one was a tribute to Flory. Included a lot of the repertoire that we learned from her.
Well, actually, one of the things that I like that we do is we're getting more interested in helping people learn her songs. And Susan has a project that she started called Sing Her Songs, that I transcribed a lot of Flory's songs. Susan shows how to play them, talks a little about where they came from. And we're using that as the basis of our outreach.
Oh, love it.
And so it's great because, people get hands-on. They get to sing. They get to sing in parallel thirds, which is one of the biggest ways that people sang along. And the harmonies are fairly easy, and the tunes are very great. They're really lively, and so kids like it.
Oh, that's cool. So you have brought me back to something else I wanted to follow up on from before when you were talking. But it seems to me that there's so much. There's a lot of backstory to pretty much everything that you're playing, not just the whole tradition, but maybe each of the pieces that you might perform in a concert. And so I'm assuming, I hope correctly, that you sort of fill in those details, that it's not just you come out on stage, you take a bow, you play a tune, that there's really some context provided and some kind of, the setting for the jewel that you're crafting when you perform. Is that true?
Yes, that is very much true. In some cases, sponsors will print programs with
but that never stops us.
But we still do talk about the history and the when we know it, the particular background of a song, I suppose sometimes I get a little carried away in concerts, and Tina and Susan are nudging me to stop talking so we can start playing. But I think it's important for people to understand the context from which this music came, and in particular, most of the audiences we perform for know little, if anything, about the music and the history of the traditions from which it comes.
Which is kind of in the tradition of early music, isn't it? That all of us who play early music, we think of ourselves as musicians and educators at the same time, because we always have to give some type of background.
Right. Yeah. And I think audiences really appreciate that. We maybe as musicians of any genre take it for granted that, everyone knows this, and I think sometimes we in a way, it devalues your knowledge and your expertise because no, everyone doesn't know that. That's what makes you special. Yeah. Well, I have been speaking on Zoom with Howard Bass and Tina Chancey, two members of the Northern Virginia-based ensemble Trio Sefardi. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thank you, Suzanne.
¿Dónde está la llave que estaba en cajón? ¿Dónde está la llave que estaba en cajón? Mis nonos la trajeron con grande dolor de su casa de España, de su casa de España.